Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I am co-founder Lori Bloom. Explore a platform of tips, trends, news, and informative discussions for you and your loved ones. Whether you're 50 and over or way over, find us on gracefullygraying.com, YouTube, and social media. Enjoy this live stream discussion.
Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I'm your host, co-founder and attorney Henry Gornbein. Today on Gracefully Graying, I am very pleased to welcome as our guest Lynn Breuer, who is the Senior Director of Community Outreach and Wellness at Jewish Family Service of Detroit. Lynn, welcome.
Hi, Henry. It's good to be here with you.
It's a pleasure having you. I know we've done interviews in the past, and you're always more than welcome. First of all, Lynn, tell our viewers a little bit about your background and what you're doing with JFS.
Absolutely. So I am a social worker, and I've been at JFS about 14 years in the Older Adult Services Department. Interestingly enough, related to today's topic, prior to coming to Jewish Family Service, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry as a trainer. So the issues of medication and aging, I have two different perspectives on. So glad to be here to talk about it.
You know, I've been through several medical procedures in the last year where I was in and out of hospitals. Every time I left the hospital or after the procedure, I was loaded up with tons of meds. And I'm kind of anti-medication. I mean, they gave me all these horrible pain pills, and I said, I don't want them. And why does aging cause misuse of medication, for lack of a better word?
That's a great question, Henry. And there are a lot of factors that contribute. You just gave us the first one, that the older we get, the more likely we are to have multiple health conditions or to have had the need to be in the hospital or have a surgery. Every time that happens, there's usually a disruption in our medications. Medications might be added with the hospitalization, some might be substituted. So there's an ever-changing landscape of what we are prescribed to take. And then sometimes when we get home, one doctor is not notified of additional medications that someone might have received in the hospital. So we have a situation where we have multiple providers, multiple healthcare conditions, changing medications, and not everyone is on the same page as to what someone should take. It can be very confusing. Also, sometimes it's hard to remember accurately if we take pills every day. Did I take them this morning, or am I remembering taking them yesterday morning? Sometimes people misuse medication simply because they feel they're not doing anything. If we think about a medication like an antidepressant, something that we often see older adults being prescribed, they don't tend to work immediately. It can take anywhere from 2 to 4 to 6 weeks before there's any effect that someone might notice. So at any point in that process, someone might simply decide to stop taking a medication, thinking it's not giving them any benefit. People also stop taking medications if they feel that they're encountering an unpleasant side effect. And sometimes stopping these medications abruptly can cause problems. It's also a very real factor that we tolerate medications differently when we're older than when we're younger. And we can talk about that if that's an area of interest.
You know, it's interesting. You raised the point that with medicine, we have different doctors. And it's like the blind man and the elephant. I found that when I went to one specialist, well, I know this area, but I know nothing about this other area. And you may be on meds for me, but I'm not sure if these other meds are right for you. And it's like you almost need a quarterback, for lack of a word, who's your internist to coordinate everything, especially when we're in an area where there's so many specialists looking over us, especially as we were aging and gracefully graying, but maybe falling apart in some respects. So, Lynn, do we tend to over-medicate our seniors?
So it's a really individual issue, Henry, that you raise, and it's something that everyone's PCP, as you said, is in the best position to know. But in general, what does happen is a medication is prescribed. It's prescribed because there's a new diagnosis or there's a new symptom that needs treating. And what we often see happening is that that newly prescribed medication does treat the new symptom, but then it causes a side effect. So someone goes back to the doctor complaining of the side effect. And then sometimes a new medication is prescribed to treat that new symptom. And then this cycle goes on and on, where each medication helps resolve a symptom, but can bring with it a new symptom or a new side effect. So sometimes the number of medications that people end up on is much higher than it might need to be. That's why that great quarterback in a PCP that you really trust, that you mentioned, is a really vital ally to avoid that.
Lynn, what about issues involving anxiety, depression, and sleep as we are aging?
Yes, they absolutely become a little bit more common the older we get. And if we look at the last several years, I think regardless of age, we've seen an increase in difficulty sleeping, in anxiety, and in depression, just because of the uncertain times we've been living through. For older adults, if we take them one at a time, isolation is often a factor that can contribute to both anxiety and depression. And those medications, as we said, bring side effects. So for example, anti-anxiety medications, while they might be very important for someone, can also increase a risk of falls. Antidepressants can take quite a bit of time to work. So it's always a risk-benefit ratio for someone and their physician to describe what step, what medication makes sense to add for someone, or is there a non-pharmacological option that might benefit them? It's hard to give blanket advice, and with me being a social worker and not a physician or a nurse, I'm not telling anybody to stop taking a medication, but to acknowledge that these are growing areas of concern. When it comes to sleep, aging can interfere with our sleep in a whole host of ways. We actually need just a little more than 6 hours of sleep, anywhere from 6.25 hours to 8 hours of sleep per night. But often what we see are older adults falling asleep earlier, perhaps earlier than they intended, in front of the television or reading a book. So if someone falls asleep at 9:30 and only needs 6 hours, that person feels like an insomniac because they're up at 3:30 in the morning, ready to start the day. So sometimes there's some sleep hygiene issues that can help, ways to stay up a little bit later, ways to manage frequent urination that sometimes happens at night by restricting some fluids in the evening hours if someone's doctor recommends that that's a good idea, because we do want to get the best quality sleep that we can. It's particularly important as we're older for our brain health.
Lynn, what about the impact of our aging brains? And I know I read in an article that you were involved in that our brains peak, I think, at age 25. So my brain's been losing cells for a long, long time, I guess.
You know, Henry, I'm right there with you. I have children older than 25, so I've lost a few cells myself. But you're right. It sounds astonishing. How can our cognition or our brain function peak in our mid-20s? But all that means is from birth to the mid-20s. Every single year, our brains can process more and more information more efficiently. And then at age 25, 26, we hit the top of an imaginary bell-shaped curve. So it's not a steady, steep decline by any means at that point. But every year, there's barely perceptible slowing to our cognitive processes that most people don't notice until the effects become cumulative much later in life. So it might be in our 50s that all of a sudden we notice, you know, I used to be able to keep my calendar of appointments in my head. Now I need it on the computer. I need it on my phone. I need it written down. Or they might notice other slight changes to memory, like coming out of a mall and thinking, where did I park? Oh yeah, it was an up lane and finding the car. Whereas in our 20s, we just made a beeline. We also notice that our processing speed has slowed down. This is just attributed to an aging brain, meaning if you're in conversation and you have something stuck on the tip of your tongue, how long does it take to come off? Well, in my 20s, I'd say, give me a minute, and that's all it took. Now I hear anything from 15 minutes to 4 hours later to my personal favorite, the middle of the night, when you roll over and there's that word that you were searching for earlier in the day. We also have some changes to our language. Sometimes we have what's called a word finding difficulty, which means that we hear a word come out of our mouth that's not the word we intended. I can give you an example. My husband was running to the grocery store the other day and he said, "Hey, do you need anything?" I said, "Yes, can you please get some blackberries?" "Well, I don't particularly like blackberries, but I love blueberries. They start with the same letter and they're in the same category." And that's what research shows us starts to happen to us, that we substitute a word that starts with the same first letter or is in the same category. So if we're noticing this happening, it's just a normal age-related change to our cognition, and we can laugh about it. The last area where it's normal to notice changes is in our ability to focus our attention. Henry, I don't know if you've ever been reading a book and you're really focused at the top of the page, and when it's time to turn the page, you realize, uh-oh, I have no idea what I just read. That's a decline in our ability to tune out distractions. So we have programs at JFS that can help, specifically our mind aerobics cognitive training classes, if anybody wants more information on that topic.
Lynn, my wife says I have the attention span of a gnat, so I understand exactly what you're saying. What can we do to combat some of the issues that you have raised earlier in our discussion?
So medication issues, you're referring to the medication issues?
I mean, just in general, I mean, medication is one thing, but what are some of the other areas that we can do? I mean, I know there's something called BEER, and maybe you can explain a little bit about that to us as we move forward.
Absolutely. So there are several steps that we can take to be sure that we're using our medications as accurately as prescribed for us. The Beers list that you're referring to, Henry, has the longest name of any list I've ever heard of. It's the Beers criteria for potentially inappropriate medication use in older adults. What happens is as we get older, our kidneys and our liver work a little bit less efficiently just with normal aging. The liver is where medications are metabolized, broken down into usable bits, and then our kidneys help us eliminate the parts we're not using. Because these don't work quite as efficiently when we're older, we develop side effects to medications that we might have tolerated fine for decades when we were younger. So this Beers list has a list of exactly that type of medication that it's best to avoid later in life. So one suggestion is for anyone to Google it. You don't have to remember the name. If you just Google Beers list, spelled just like the alcoholic drink, it will pop up and look at the medications that you're taking, see if they're on the list. If they are, please don't stop taking them, right? That's a physician decision. But at your next appointment with your doctor, say, you know, these two of my medications are on the Beers list. I'm wondering if there's something else I could take that would be effective for me that would not be likely to cause any cognitive side effects. So that's the first step. But the other thing we can do is use any sort of assistance to be sure we're getting our medications accurately, not accidentally forgetting we took it in the morning and taking a second dose that evening, or missing a day's medication. Some ways to help with that is to take a good look at what system we're currently using. Sometimes people really like having medication boxes set up for them. Just if they take medications once a day, it's a Monday through Sunday box. Or if people take it multiple times a day, there are boxes for AM and PM. And that way it's easy to tell at a glance, have I had my meds today or did I miss them? Many pharmacies in the area will also blister pack medications where they're marked by the date. Here's a little cup that says Monday the 17th, AM medications, and it lists everything that's in there. You peel it, take those medications. There also are automatic medication dispensers that only need to be filled once a month, that you set the time and they will alarm and dispense exactly the pills someone needs at that time. So those are some suggestions, but it's also helpful to keep medications all in one place and to establish routine. For example, right after your morning coffee, taking those medications so it becomes part of daily habit. One other tip that I often hear people find really helpful is just setting a simple alarm in their phone. If they need to take medications twice a day, have those times in their phone so the alarm goes off, and you learn not to ignore that alarm, but to get up and take those medications. For the aging brain question that you asked, I'd really suggest engaging in as much mental stimulation as possible. Our cognition is a little bit of a use it or lose it scenario. So anytime you can really challenge your cognition, you're helping combat some of that age-related decline. And I encourage anybody who's interested to reach out to us at JFS about our cognitive programs.
Lynn, we're running out of time. Are there any final thoughts you want to share with our viewers before we sign off for today?
Yes, the biggest thought that I'd like to share is just the recognition that aging is an accomplishment. It means that we've lived a long life. We have a lot to be proud of. In so many ways, our lives are richer for all of our experiences. At the same time, there are some universal, common challenges that come with aging. Things we've learned to laugh about, like needing reading glasses. And we're also not surprised if we develop a knee or a hip issue. So if you notice that you're having trouble keeping your medication straight, or if you notice that your memory seems to need a little more support than before, try to resist the urge to keep that private. Sometimes people still feel stigma around that. And instead, I encourage you to go, that's a badge of honor that I've lived a long life, and I'm going to reach out and get some help and support.
Lynn Breuer, I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying. I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying. And of course, I want to thank our sponsors who support Gracefully Graying. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.